I found my stepmother's diary, and it reveals a plot against my father. Growing up, my father and I had been inseparable. After my mother passed away, he devoted his life to raising me. We were a team, navigating the world together, until Margaret entered the picture. She was polished, charming, and everything my father thought he needed to rebuild his life. I wanted to be happy for him, but there was something about her that didn't sit right with me. Margaret was always a little too perfect, a little too attentive when my father was around, and a little too cold when he wasn't. But my dad loved her, so I tried to keep my suspicions to myself. That changed the day I found her diary. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, and I was helping my father clear out the guest room for a renovation project. Margaret had gone out for her usual yoga class, leaving me free to work without her hovering. While moving a stack of boxes, one toppled over, spilling its contents onto the floor. Among the papers and knickknacks was a small, leather-bound book that caught my attention. I picked it up, curious, and opened the cover. The first page was inscribed with Margaret's name in neat cursive. My heart raced as I realized what I was holding, her diary. I should have put it back, but something about it felt like an invitation. Margaret wasn't the type to leave personal things lying around, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant to find this. Flipping through the pages, I skimmed the entries, my initial guilt giving way to shock. The entries weren't just personal musings or reflections. They were full of observations about my father. She wrote about his habits, his weaknesses, and his finances in meticulous detail. One entry stood out, dated 2 months prior. "Henry is completely smitten with me, which works to my advantage. He's so trusting, so eager to keep the peace, that he doesn't question my suggestions. The next step is getting him to sign the documents. Once that's done, the rest will fall into place." I stared at the words, my hands trembling. What documents? What was Margaret planning? My father trusted her implicitly, but it was clear from these entries that she didn't share his devotion. I couldn't stop reading. The more I delved into the diary, the more sinister her intentions became. She detailed how she had gained my father's trust, slowly isolating him from his closest friends and advisors. There were mentions of meetings with a lawyer, someone who wasn't my father's usual counsel, and cryptic references to a transfer of assets. My stomach churned. Margaret wasn't just calculating, she was dangerous. And my father was walking straight into her trap. When I heard the front door open, I snapped the diary shut and stuffed it back into the box, my heart racing. Margaret's cheerful voice echoed through the hallway, calling out for my father. I quickly stacked the boxes and pretended to be busy sorting through old photo albums. "Busy as always," she said, her eyes lingering on me for a moment too long. "Just helping, Dad," I replied, forcing a smile. She smiled back, but there was something icy behind it. For the first time, I noticed how her gaze seemed to assess me, as though she were sizing me up. That night, I couldn't sleep. The words in the diary replayed in my mind, each one more damning than the last. I knew I had to protect my father, but I couldn't confront Margaret without more evidence. If I accused her outright, she would deny everything, and my father might side with her. I needed a plan. If you're not following our channel, you might never see it again. But if you're subscribed, congratulations. You'll always have access to the most interesting stories, whenever you want to watch and listen. I spent the night tossing and turning, my mind replaying the tense dinner conversation over and over. Every laugh, every smile from Alice's family seemed more calculated in hindsight. Their warmth was a mask, and behind it was an agenda that seemed to have everything to do with my inheritance and nothing to do with welcoming me into their fold. By morning, I decided to confront Alice. She was already up, sipping coffee on the terrace, her phone buzzing constantly with notifications. She looked at me, her bright smile faltering slightly when she saw my expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone light but guarded. I sat down across from her, staring at the untouched breakfast she'd ordered. "We need to talk about last night." Alice sighed, setting her phone down. What about it? Your parents, I said. Your mother, especially. She kept bringing up my assets, my business. Why does it matter so much to them? Alice hesitated, her gaze darting away for a moment. It's just they're old-fashioned. They believe in protecting family wealth, keeping things secure. That's all. That's not all, Alice, I countered. Your mom all but said I should sign over everything to you. Does she think I'm some kind of threat to your family? Alice's face hardened, a rare but chilling expression I'd never seen before. She's just being cautious. You don't know how things work in families like mine. There are expectations. Expectations? I repeated. Like what? That I hand over control of my life because I'm married into your family? Her lips pressed into a thin line. Look, maybe this wasn't the best time to bring it up. But yes, they think it's smart for us to have some kind of agreement. It's not personal, it's just business. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Alice, the woman I'd fallen in love with, was standing there defending her family's attempts to strong-arm me. My heart sank, but I kept my voice steady. And what about you? I asked. Do you agree with them? Alice hesitated, but the pause said everything. I think it's practical, she admitted. We're building a life together, and this could protect both of us. I stared at her, my chest tightening. Protect us? Or protect your family? Over the next few days, the tension between us grew. Alice became distant, throwing herself into family obligations and avoiding the topic altogether. Meanwhile, her parents seemed to double down on their efforts to win me over, or manipulate me, depending on how you looked at it. Her father, Charles, invited me to play golf with him, a sport I barely knew. I could tell he was testing me, watching my every move with a critical eye. At lunch afterward, he leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of wine. You're a bright young man, he said, his tone casual but laced with condescension. You've built something impressive for yourself, but success can be fragile, you know? It's important to align yourself with people who understand how to maintain it. I bristled at the implication but forced a smile. I'd like to think I've done a decent job managing things so far. Of course, he replied smoothly, but marriage changes things. My advice? Trust Alice. She has a good head for these matters. That evening, Alice's mother cornered me in the library. She gestured to the shelves of leather-bound books, their titles faded with age. The history of this family is in every corner of this house, she said. Generations of effort and sacrifice. We can't risk letting it fall into the wrong hands. Is that what you think I am? I asked, my voice tight. The wrong hands? She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. It's not about you, dear. It's about ensuring that everything stays intact. And by intact, you mean under your control, I said bluntly. Her smile widened. I see you're catching on. I couldn't take it anymore. That night, I packed a small bag and left the estate, needing space to think. I checked into a hotel in the city, trying to make sense of the situation. Had I walked into a trap? Was my love for Alice blinding me to the reality of her family's motives? The next day, I received a call from an unknown number. Hesitant, I answered. Is this James? A woman's voice asked. Yes, I replied cautiously. Who's asking? My name is Victoria, she said. I was married into the Maxwell family before you. I think we need to talk. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of determination. I wasn't just going to survive this, I was going to fight back. My marriage to Ethan had turned into a power struggle I hadn't signed up for, but I refused to let his family strip me of everything I had worked so hard for. After my meeting with my lawyer, Samantha, I had a strategy in place. My assets were protected through a trust I'd set up before marrying Ethan, but I needed concrete proof of the Callaways' manipulative tactics to ensure they couldn't use the courts to force my hand. That meant playing their game, but on my terms. I returned to the Callaway estate, my heart pounding as I stepped through the ornate doors. Ethan and his parents were in the sitting room, sipping coffee as though the world hadn't shifted beneath us. "There she is," Ethan said, his voice cold. "Have you come to your senses?" "I've come to talk," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "But I need to make sure we're on the same page. If you want me to sign this, I need full transparency." His mother, Eleanor, raised an eyebrow. "Transparency about what?" "About why this agreement is so urgent all of a sudden," I said, meeting her gaze. "If it's just a formality, then you shouldn't mind explaining everything to me, right?" Eleanor exchanged a glance with her husband, Franklin, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Of course," she said smoothly. "We just want to ensure the family's assets are secure. Surely you understand the importance of protecting our legacy." I fought the urge to laugh. "Your legacy?" I thought. "This is about control, not security." "I do," I said instead. "But I need a day to review everything thoroughly before I make any decisions." "I'm sure you'd prefer I don't sign something I don't fully understand." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. "Fine," he said, his voice clipped. "But don't take too long." That evening, I set up a discreet meeting with Lila, the housekeeper who had worked for the Callaways for years. She had always been kind to me, and I hoped she might have insights into the family's motives. Lila hesitated when I brought up the prenuptial amendment. "I don't know much, ma'am," she said, wringing her hands, "but I've overheard Mr. Callaway talking about some business troubles. He mentioned needing liquidity fast." "Business troubles?" I repeated, my pulse quickening. "Do you know what kind?" She shook her head. "I'm sorry, but that's all I know." It wasn't much, but it confirmed my suspicions. The Callaways weren't just trying to control me. They were trying to use my assets to cover their own mistakes. The next day, I returned to the estate, keeping my expression neutral as I faced Eleanor and Franklin in the study. "I've reviewed the agreement," I said, "and I'm willing to sign it, on one condition." Ethan looked up sharply. "What condition?" "I want us to have a family meeting first," I said. "We need to discuss everything openly, so there are no misunderstandings moving forward." Eleanor frowned, clearly uneasy, but Franklin nodded. "That's reasonable. We'll meet tonight." As the family gathered in the grand dining room that evening, I felt a surge of adrenaline. Samantha was stationed nearby, waiting for my signal to step in if things escalated. I had also set up a hidden recording device in my purse, just in case. Ethan opened the meeting with a sharp tone. "Let's not drag this out. If you're going to sign, just sign." "Not yet," I said, standing my ground. "Before I do, I need to know why this agreement was suddenly so urgent." "You owe me that much." Franklin sighed, his patience wearing thin. "We've already explained this, dear. It's about protecting the family." "Protecting it from what?" I pressed. "Lila mentioned something about business troubles. Is that why you need access to my assets?" Ethan shot me a warning glare, but I didn't back down. Eleanor's composed mask slipped for a moment, revealing a flicker of panic. "What business troubles?" she said quickly, her voice too high-pitched to sound convincing. "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice rising. "I know something's wrong, and I have a right to know what I'm being dragged into." Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Enough of this," he snapped. "You're either with us or against us." "And if I'm against you?" I asked, my heart pounding. He leaned in, his voice low and menacing. "Then you'll regret it." That was the moment I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I reached into my bag and pulled out the recording device. "That's all I needed to hear," I said, pressing the stop button. "This conversation has been recorded, and I have enough evidence to prove you've been trying to coerce me." Eleanor gasped, and Franklin's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You're bluffing," he growled. "Am I?" I countered, holding up the device. "Do you really want to take that chance?" Ethan's expression twisted with rage. "You set us up." "No," I said firmly. You set yourselves up by trying to manipulate me. I came into this marriage in good faith, and all you've done is try to tear me down." I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, I stopped and looked back at them. "Consider this my resignation from your games. If you try to come after me again, I won't hesitate to take legal action." The aftermath wasn't easy. Ethan tried to contact me several times, begging for forgiveness and claiming he'd had no choice but to follow his parents' lead. I ignored every message. The Callaways eventually backed off, likely realizing they couldn't risk a public scandal. With Samantha's help, I ensured my assets were untouchable. I also filed for divorce, walking away from a marriage that had turned into a nightmare. It hurt to let go of the man I thought I loved, but I knew I deserved better. Someone who saw me as an equal, not a pawn. As I rebuilt my life, I found strength in the lessons I'd learned. The Callaways had tried to break me, but they had underestimated my resilience. I had fought back, and I had won. And now I was free. The end.